Carl Jung explained why they ignore you even though they want you. Have you ever felt someone's energy so deeply that you just knew they wanted you, yet they never called, never texted, never showed up? What if I told you they weren't avoiding you, they were avoiding a part of themselves that only you could awaken? Carl Jung understood this silence better than anyone. And today, we're diving deep into the psychological truth behind the one who wants you, but disappears anyway. Part 1, the inner conflict. When desire meets fear. There's a powerful psychological paradox that lies at the heart of so many seemingly inexplicable human behaviors. The pull towards something we deeply want, and the simultaneous fear of actually having it. Carl Jung identified this internal split as a core part of the human psyche, a fundamental tension between the conscious and the unconscious. The persona and the shadow, the desire and the dread. When someone truly wants to be with you, but still chooses not to reach out. This isn't just a matter of indecision or immaturity. It's often an invisible war taking place inside their psyche, a battle between what they crave and what terrifies them. Jung argued that our unconscious minds are not just passive repositories of memory and instinct, they're active forces, influencing behavior in ways we often don't understand. And nowhere is this more evident than in love and connection. You may be on someone's mind constantly. They may replay old conversations, stalk your social media. Imagine a future with you, but still silence, still no message, no call, no approach. Why? Because deep within them, there's a part that wants you and an equally strong part that fears what being with you would require. The desire, anima, wholeness, and soul recognition. To understand the desire, we first look at what Jung called the anima in men and the animus in women, the contrasexual archetype. The anima is the feminine soul image within a man, representing his emotional core, vulnerability, intuition, and potential for connection. When a man meets a woman who resonates deeply with his anima, she doesn't just seem attractive, she feels essential. She appears to reflect something sacred that he's been unconsciously yearning for. This isn't superficial attraction. This is psychological and spiritual recognition. This is why that person may feel inexplicably drawn to you. You're not just a person, you're a mirror to something within them that they've buried. You awaken a part of them they've long forgotten or never dared to confront. That's the source of the desire, the belief that somehow, through you, they could become more whole. The fear, the shadow, and the risk of vulnerability. But then there's the other part, the shadow. The shadow is everything a person has disowned about themselves. Their fears, insecurities, shame, pain, failures, all the things they didn't know how to face. They push down into the unconscious. But the thing about the unconscious is this, it doesn't stay hidden forever. Especially not in the presence of someone who evokes the anima. When you stir someone's soul, you don't just make them feel good, you also make them feel exposed. You become the one person who can see them. And that's both intoxicating and terrifying. Their unconscious might whisper, if you let this person in, they'll discover everything you've worked to hide. And because of that, they retreat not from you, but from what you awaken in them. Jung believed that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So when this person doesn't contact you, they often believe it's for the best, but what they're really doing is obeying unconscious defense mechanisms they haven't yet confronted. Silence is their shield. Distance is their comfort zone. Complexes and emotional overload. Jung also developed the concept of complexes, emotionally charged associations, and memory clusters rooted in past experiences, usually early in life. For example, someone with an abandonment complex may have internalized the belief that anyone they love will eventually leave. If that person wants you deeply, it can activate that complex like a psychological alarm bell. You'll be hurt again. Don't go there. Desire, in this case, becomes dangerous. Even thinking about reaching out might bring up anxiety. Panic, dread, all stemming from unresolved childhood pain. They may intellectualize it, tell themselves it's not the right time or that you deserve better. But beneath the surface, their inner child is screaming, "Don't let this happen. It's not safe." They're not pushing you away because they don't want you. They're pushing you away because the emotional consequences of wanting you feel too overwhelming. The ego's struggle to stay in control. The ego, in Jungian psychology, is the part of us that wants to maintain a consistent image of strength, composure, independence. It fears losing control. To contact someone you deeply want means admitting that you need them, that you miss them, that they have power over you. That's ego death. And for many people, that's worse than loneliness. Reaching out to you could feel like surrendering. And if they've built an identity around not needing anyone, then desiring you becomes a threat to that identity. They might say they're focusing on themselves or not ready for a relationship. But what they're really doing is protecting their ego from annihilation. The ego whispers, if you contact them, they might ignore you. They might not feel the same. You'll look weak. So silence becomes the more rational choice, even though it goes against the heart's longing. Archetypal fear of transformation. Jung often emphasized that love is not safe. It's not meant to be. Real love demands transformation, and transformation is scary. If you are the type of person who inspires someone to change, grow, face their shadow, and connect with their authentic self, that is deeply threatening to the structures they built their life around. To be with you might mean having to leave old patterns behind. Admit past mistakes, confront their fears, and maybe even walk away from other relationships that no longer serve their evolution. Most people don't fear love. They fear what love demands. To love you would mean stepping into unknown territory. That's why they can desire you deeply but never reach out. Because reaching out is the first step toward the death of who they used to be, and not everyone is ready to die that way. The need for emotional safety. At the core of it all is a need for safety. That person may still be operating from a survival-based mindset, even though you might represent truth, healing, and real connection. If they don't feel safe emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, they will not come forward. Jung understood that people only confront their unconscious when they have the inner strength to do so. If that strength isn't there yet, even the most beautiful connection can feel like a threat. You may wonder, but I've never hurt them. I've only shown care. That's true. But for someone whose inner world is chaotic or wounded, even healthy love can feel unsafe. It's unfamiliar. It asks for openness, and they're not ready. Avoidance is a form of control. Another overlooked reason why someone doesn't contact you, even when they want to, is because avoidance gives them a sense of control. They can fantasize about you, imagine what could be, replay memories, all from the safety of their mind. Reaching out would mean stepping into the unknown. It would require them to be vulnerable, risk rejection, and relinquish control. Avoiding contact allows them to stay in charge of the narrative. They can tell themselves stories you wouldn't be interested. It's too complicated. They'll reach out first. These are all ego-based defense mechanisms that keep them from having to face the raw truth of their desire and their fear. Final reflection in this section. When someone wants you but doesn't reach out, they're not just ghosting you. They're battling a psychological storm inside themselves. You've awakened something in them that feels both beautiful and terrifying. They may not be consciously aware of it, but their soul recognizes you. Their unconscious has responded, but the conscious self, the ego, is not ready. So they stay silent, not because they don't care, but because they care so much. It threatens to undo the very foundation of who they think they are. And that's the paradox of love. Through the eyes of Jungian psychology, the closer someone gets to their soul, the more likely they are to run. Part 2, the shadow and emotional repression. To understand why someone who desires you might avoid contact altogether, we need to look deeper into what Carl Jung called the shadow. This is one of the most vital and haunting elements in depth psychology. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we repress, hide, deny, or feel ashamed of. It's the collection of everything we don't want to be, all the memories, emotions, and traits we'd rather forget. And yet, it doesn't go away. It lives within us. It acts in secret, and it always finds a way to emerge, often through relationships, especially ones that touch the soul. When someone feels drawn to you but stays distant, it's often because you awaken their shadow. You don't just stir affection, you trigger emotional material they've spent their life avoiding. Emotional repression isn't always conscious. One of the most misunderstood truths about emotional repression is that people don't always know they're doing it. They might not sit around saying, "Oh, I'm repressing my childhood abandonment issues." Instead, they feel vague anxiety when they think of you, or they get a headache, or they compulsively distract themselves when your name comes up. It's like their nervous system is wired to run not from you, but from the intensity you bring. Jung said that what we resist persists, and nowhere is this more visible than in how people resist their own feelings. That person who can't contact you might be consumed by thoughts of you, checking your updates, wondering how you are. But the very act of confronting those feelings consciously is too much for them. So they suppress it. They numb it. They pretend it doesn't exist. Your presence triggers emotional memory. Here's the part that hurts, but needs to be said. The more deeply you affect someone, the more likely you are to awaken the parts of them that are still wounded. Imagine a person who was emotionally neglected as a child, who reached out for love and was ignored, who tried to express their needs and got punished or ridiculed. That child grows into an adult who tells themselves, "I don't need anyone. I'm better off alone." Then you come along and you see them. You care. You listen. You hold space for them in a way no one ever has. At first, this feels incredible, but very quickly, their unconscious starts to panic. You represent everything they were denied, which means you also represent every painful moment where that kind of love was unavailable. So when they avoid you, they're not avoiding you. They're avoiding the emotional avalanche that comes with what you represent: repressed grief, shame, and fear. Many people walk through life carrying repressed grief for the childhood they never had, the love they were denied, the betrayals they endured, or the parts of themselves they had to kill to survive. The desire to be loved is universal, but the capacity to receive love is not. When someone wants you but doesn't contact you, it could be because they haven't yet allowed themselves to grieve what they've lost. To connect with you would be to admit that they want something they've trained themselves not to believe in. They may carry intense shame. "I'm not good enough. I'm broken." If they get too close, they'll leave like everyone else. These aren't always conscious beliefs, but they're deeply embedded in the psyche, and they're powerful enough to override desire. So they bury it. They keep the shadow buried. And you, tragically, become the symbol of something too painful to touch. How the shadow uses sabotage. One of the most cunning things a shadow does is sabotage intimacy before it can begin. That person might justify not contacting you in logical ways. "They're too good for me. They're probably with someone. I don't have anything to offer." But those statements are not facts. They're defense mechanisms. The shadow fears being exposed. It doesn't want the truth to come out. So it convinces the ego to stay away, to ghost, to disappear, to block, to avoid, because avoidance equals safety. Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives. When someone ghosts you while wanting you, their shadow is in control. It's pulling the strings behind the scenes, whispering, "Don't go there. You'll get hurt. You'll be seen. You'll be rejected." When love is a threat, this is counterintuitive, but profound love is a threat to the unhealed psyche. Yes, love is beautiful, but it also demands honesty, vulnerability, and transformation. For someone who's lived in emotional suppression for years, maybe even decades, your presence can feel like an earthquake. You shake loose everything they've carefully buried. and it terrifies them. They may fantasize about you, but they're terrified to actually face you, because facing you would mean confronting the parts of themselves they've denied. You are a mirror, and that mirror doesn't just reflect beauty, it reflects pain, fear, and longing. They want you, but they're scared of what wanting you might expose. Trauma-bonded defense mechanisms. Some people carry unresolved trauma that teaches them to expect disappointment. To trust is to be foolish. To love is to be hurt. So they preemptively pull away, even if you've shown no signs of danger. Their nervous system doesn't care. It's not reading your character, it's reacting to a memory. This is why trauma survivors often avoid those who are actually good for them. They confuse safety with unfamiliarity. The pain is predictable. Healthy connection is not. So when they don't contact you, it's not because you're unsafe, it's because you're too safe, too real, too open. And that threatens the trauma-based identity they've grown attached to. Shadow projection onto you. Here's where things get even more complex. Jung taught that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. That person may be projecting their own fear, guilt, anger, or shame onto you without realizing it. Maybe they've told themselves that you're the dangerous one, that you will hurt them, that you are emotionally unavailable. This is their psyche trying to maintain distance, not because it's true, but because it's safer that way. They're not seeing you. They're seeing a projection of their own disowned emotions. You might feel confused, hurt, rejected, but you're not being rejected. The real you isn't even being perceived. You're just a screen for their inner movie. Their shadow needs someone to place blame on, to assign danger to, and sadly, it often picks the one person who cares the most. Emotional intimacy as a trigger. For a person with a repressed emotional history, emotional intimacy feels like a threat. Even if they think they want it, they may have been conditioned to suppress affection, vulnerability, expression. And when you offer those things freely, it contradicts their entire emotional framework. It feels destabilizing. They want you to love them. But when you do, they question it. They doubt it. They panic. They ask themselves, why would someone like that care about me? And rather than explore the answer, they retreat, because staying silent hurts less than being exposed. Why you feel it so deeply? You're not imagining things. Jung believed in the power of energetic and unconscious connections. If you feel this person thinks about you, they probably do. If you sense their inner chaos, you're probably right. Depth connections don't need constant contact to be real. They exist in the unconscious. That's why this hurts so much, because something is there. It's not all in your head, but it's also not something you can force into existence. The person may be stuck in a shadow cycle, a loop of desire and repression, love and fear, longing and avoidance. You can't pull them out of it. Only they can confront it, the emotional repression they've relied on for so long. Part 3, the persona, the mask they can't take off around you. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona, the mask we wear to face the world. It's the social identity we build, often unconsciously, to gain acceptance, approval, and survival. Think of it as your curated self, the version of you that fits in, looks confident, stays unbothered, performs well. Now imagine someone has built their entire identity around that mask. Maybe they're the independent one, the unavailable one, the player, or the strong and silent type. Then you show up and something about your presence shakes that mask loose. They want to be seen by you, but they're terrified of what you'll find when the mask falls. Persona versus authentic self. Jung believed that the bigger the gap between your persona and your true self, the greater the tension within. This tension eventually erupts, usually in moments of deep emotional intensity, such as falling in love, when someone desires you but can't contact you. Part of the reason might be this: you don't match the version of themselves they've shown the world. Reaching out to you would require them to act in a way that violates their constructed identity. They've told people, or themselves that they're not the relationship type, that they're not soft, that they don't believe in love, that they're too busy, too broken, too logical, too detached. You challenge that narrative just by existing. So to reach out would feel like betraying the identity they've spent years curating. You trigger their authentic self, and that's scary. The persona is designed to protect, but love invites exposure. It invites the raw, unfiltered, unscripted version of ourselves to come to the surface. And for someone who's relied on a social mask for years, this is incredibly threatening. You might think you're being kind, sincere, and welcoming, and you are, but to someone who has never experienced that kind of acceptance, your warmth can feel like a spotlight on everything they're trying to hide. You might not even know what you're seeing, but they do. That's why, paradoxically, it's safer for them to admire you from a distance, to want you secretly, because if they get too close, they'd have to drop the act. And they don't know what remains once the persona crumbles. The risk of losing control. The persona gives a sense of control. It lets someone decide how others perceive them. When you stir their emotions, you don't just make them feel something, you make them feel out of control. They can't regulate how much they think of you. They can't suppress the butterflies. They can't stop wondering if you're thinking of them too. That loss of composure is intolerable for the ego. So rather than risk letting the mask slip, they avoid you altogether. You might ask, why would someone be afraid to be real? Because real is vulnerable. Real is messy. Real means risking rejection, not of the mask, but of the core self. They wonder, what if I show who I really am and they walk away? So they stay silent. They keep the persona intact. It hurts, but it feels safer than being known and rejected. Social image and inner shame. For many people, especially those who've been conditioned to associate worth with achievement, the idea of showing weakness is unbearable. If they perceive you as emotionally attuned, grounded, or spiritually aware, they may feel inferior by comparison. They don't want to contact you because they don't want to expose the cracks in their mask. Maybe they think they're not smart enough, not stable enough, not healed enough. They feel like an imposter, and they'd rather you remember the polished version of them than discover the truth underneath. This isn't always a conscious thought process, but the fear of shame, the belief that if someone really sees me, they'll walk away as a core driver of silence. The fear of intimacy versus the desire for approval. There's a tension between two psychological drives: the desire for approval, the persona, the desire for intimacy, the authentic self. Reaching out to you would serve intimacy, but it risks approval. It threatens their ability to be seen as cool, unbothered, collected, or above it. In today's emotionally avoidant culture, vulnerability is often labeled as weakness, and they don't want to lose face. Even if you've shown them that it's safe to open up, they may not believe it yet, especially if they've spent years convincing everyone, including themselves, that they don't care, that they've moved on, that they're stronger alone. You represent a crack in the mask, and the deeper the desire, the bigger the crack. The persona collapsing creates identity crisis. Jung warned that when the persona is too dominant, it can create a fragile ego, one that cracks under pressure. If that person reaches out to you and you don't respond in the exact way they hope, they risk ego collapse. That's why they keep control by not trying. To try is to risk. To risk is to fail. To fail is to shatter the identity they've built. So they say nothing, not because they don't care, but because caring would require reconstruction of self, and they're not ready to go through that dismantling. When you're a threat to their social mask, you may not know it, but your presence may contradict everything they've told others about themselves. Maybe they've said, I'm not looking for anything serious. I don't believe in soulmates. I'm over them. Then they see you again, or hear your voice, or read a message, and it cracks them open. They want to reach out, but if they do, Their whole facade crumbles. You become the exception that proves they've been lying not just to the world, but to themselves. And that's too much to face for someone still clinging to their persona for protection, a mask that was built for survival. It's important to understand that the persona isn't inherently bad. It's a coping strategy, often developed in childhood. For someone who grew up in a household where feelings weren't safe, where being too much got punished, or where love was conditional, the persona is what allowed them to survive. Now, as an adult, they've outgrown the mask, but they don't know that yet. They still think they need it to be loved, accepted, or protected. You, on the other hand, invite the real version of them forward, not the performer, not the achiever, not the emotionally distant archetype, just the human, and they don't know how to be that person yet. So instead of reaching out, they retreat into the mask because it's familiar, even if it's killing them inside. Part 4, the anima animus. You are the mirror to their soul. Carl Jung introduced the profound concept of the anima, in animus, the unconscious feminine side of a man, anima, and the unconscious masculine side of a woman, animus. These archetypes aren't just psychological theories. They are the blueprint for how we fall in love, how we relate to the opposite sex, and most importantly, how we project inner longings onto real people. When someone wants you but stays silent, it's often because you've triggered their anima or animus. You aren't just attractive to them, you are symbolic. You reflect something they've longed for, repressed, or never truly understood within themselves. You are not just a person, you're a mirror to a side of them they didn't even know was missing. And that is terrifying. The anima as the idealized feminine. For men, the anima represents their inner emotional world, their capacity to feel, to nurture, to connect on a deep level. Most men, due to societal expectations or early emotional wounding, are cut off from this part of themselves. They're taught to be rational, self-contained, and emotionally in control. But when they encounter a woman who awakens their anima, someone intuitive, emotionally intelligent, compassionate, spiritually deep, they don't just feel drawn to her. They feel exposed by her. You may unknowingly represent his anima, not only what he wants, but what he has disowned within himself. So while his soul may scream, "That's her," his ego screams, "Run." Not because you're dangerous, but because your presence threatens to dismantle his defenses. You make him feel, and feeling is something he may not be prepared for. The animus as the inner masculine. For women, the animus is the inner masculine associated with logic, direction, authority, and structure. A woman disconnected from her animus may find herself over-identifying with passivity or lacking confidence. But when she meets a man who represents these qualities in a healthy, grounded way, a man who is decisive, authentic, protective, and clear, her animus is stirred, she feels inexplicably drawn to him as though he's the missing piece. But if she hasn't integrated her own animus, she may idolize him or worse, feel triggered by him. He reminds her of her own unrealized potential, her inner masculine power she's not yet claimed. And she may want him deeply but feel unworthy, intimidated, or even resentful of the vulnerability he brings up in her. So she pulls away. Projection and the inner ideal. Jung emphasized that before we integrate the anima or animus, we tend to project them onto others. This means we don't fall in love with the actual person in front of us. We fall in love with the symbol they represent to our unconscious. This explains why someone might obsess over you, romanticize you, fantasize about you, and still not reach out. They aren't relating to you as a real, flawed, complex human being. They're relating to their inner archetype projected onto your face. And that projection is powerful. It carries the weight of their childhood wounds, fantasies, hopes, and unresolved inner stories. You aren't just a person. You're the gateway to their unconscious. That's why they feel out of control around you. That's why they might idolize you in private but avoid you in public. That's why they might say things like, "I don't know why I can't stop thinking about you. You feel familiar. I feel like I've known you forever." Because to their unconscious, they have soul recognition versus psychological readiness. There's a phenomenon Jung would describe as soul recognition, a deep knowing that the person in front of you is somehow important, significant, transformative. But here's the painful truth. Soul recognition does not equal readiness. Someone can look at you and know on a soul level that you are meant to cross paths, that there's something sacred about your connection, and still they won't contact you. Why? Because the psychological infrastructure required to hold that level of connection isn't there yet. They may still be living from their ego, trapped in patterns of avoidance, or too identified with their wounds. Soul recognition is not the same as emotional maturity. It's not the same as healed attachment. They can know you're the one and still run. The fear of losing autonomy. Integration of the animus requires the ego to surrender control. To merge with someone who reflects your unconscious is to risk losing yourself, or so it seems. Someone might want you, but deep down fear that if they get too close, they'll be consumed. They'll have to give up their freedom, their identity, their detachment. They might fear being dominated, overwhelmed, or emotionally dependent, especially if they were taught to see vulnerability as weakness. This creates a psychological paradox. I want you because you make me feel whole, but I'm terrified that needing you means I'm not whole. And so they stay silent because reaching out would require them to redefine who they are. You mirror what they haven't healed. One of the most challenging realities of soul-level attraction is this. You reflect not just who they could become, but everything they haven't yet healed. They look at you and feel the potential of real love, of transformation, of purpose, but they also see their own immaturity, fear, and unresolved trauma. You become both the dream and the discomfort. They want to be with you, but they're afraid you'll see through them. You'll notice their cracks, their inner chaos, their emotional immaturity, and because you feel so significant, they fear that your rejection would be catastrophic to their self-worth. So instead of risking that level of exposure, they withdraw. They preserve the fantasy rather than confront the reality. The sacred feminine and masculine clash. In depth psychology, when the anima and animus are unbalanced, it creates inner conflict that shows up in relationships. For example, a man who hasn't integrated his anima may either idolize women or fear emotional closeness. A woman who hasn't integrated her animus may either give away her power or resent men's authority. So when they meet someone who challenges this pattern, someone who feels different, the psyche rebels. The unconscious fights to preserve its old identity, even though their soul whispers, "Go toward them." Their wounds scream, "Stay away." That's why someone can feel you're good for them and still push you away. Not because they don't want healing, but because healing would mean facing everything they've avoided. Part 5, projection, when they place their past on you. One of Carl Jung's most important psychological insights is that we don't just see others as they are, we see them as we are. We project our inner world onto others constantly. When someone has unresolved wounds, unhealed trauma, or buried fears, those elements often get projected onto the people they feel most intensely about. So when someone wants you, but doesn't contact you, it may have nothing to do with you and everything to do with the unfinished emotional business inside them. They aren't relating to you as a clean slate. They're relating to you as a screen on which their unconscious plays an old movie. What is projection in Jungian psychology? Projection occurs when someone takes an element of their unconscious, something they haven't fully accepted, processed, or even recognized, and attributes it to another person. This can be a quality, an emotion, a fear, a desire, or a belief. For example, a person who is emotionally unavailable might accuse others of being distant. Someone who feels unlovable may believe that you would never love them, even if you've shown nothing but care. Someone who harbors guilt may perceive rejection even where none exists. When desire and projection combine, which they often do, the result is emotional chaos. They may idealize you, villainize you, or push you away, not because of anything you've done, but because your presence activates psychological content they've never sorted out. You're reminding them of someone else. Here's something people rarely want to admit. Many of us are still emotionally stuck in unresolved relationships from the past, especially with parents or early caregivers. Jung suggested that we unconsciously seek partners who reflect back the same emotional wounds we experienced as children, because the psyche longs to resolve them. So when this person meets you, you might subconsciously remind them of the parent who abandoned them, the lover who betrayed them, the friend who judged them, the sibling who outshined them. And even if you do nothing to replicate those patterns, the emotional memory is so strong that they respond to the past, not the present. They might say, "I feel like you're going to hurt me. I just can't trust anyone right now. You don't understand me." But the truth is they're projecting an old fear onto a new connection. They're not seeing you clearly. When someone is under the grip of projection, they lose the ability to relate to you as a real, complex human being. You become a symbol, a representative of something they have carried inside them for years. You may notice they accuse you of intentions you don't have. They seem hot and cold, unsure, or confused. They distance themselves after moments of emotional closeness. They overreact to small things or twist your words. This isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because they're not responding to you. They're responding to their internal narrative. And if they have a history of trauma, betrayal, or emotional neglect, that narrative can be filled with mistrust, fear, and self-protection. The fear of repeating the past. Most people carry what Jung would call emotional complexes, charged patterns of behavior and feeling that stem from unresolved wounds. When a new relationship resembles the shape of an old one, even slightly, that complex can get triggered. Let's say this person deeply desires you, but the last time they let someone in, they were shattered. They never recovered. Maybe they were cheated on, ghosted, manipulated, or made to feel not enough. So now, even though you represent something beautiful, their nervous system treats you like a threat. You feel too good to be true. They start looking for signs that the same betrayal is about to happen again. They become hypervigilant. They search for evidence to confirm their fear. And when they can't find any, they create distance instead, just in case. The logic becomes, if I don't contact them, I can't be hurt by them. If I push them away first, they can't leave me. If I don't try, I can't fail. And so, silence becomes their way of protecting themselves from imagined repetition. You're the container for their shame. There's another form of projection that Jung described, projecting the shadow. The shadow is everything we reject or dislike about ourselves. And often, when someone cannot bear to face those parts internally, they project them externally. This person may carry a deep sense of unworthiness, guilt, or shame. They may feel broken inside, but instead of dealing with those feelings, they unconsciously attribute them to you. They think, "You'll judge me. You'll abandon me when you see the real me. You're too good for me." These thoughts feel real to them, but they're not about you. They're about the inner self they've rejected. So instead of facing that shame, they ghost. They disappear. They act like they don't care. Because to come close would be to risk being seen, and they don't yet believe they're worthy of being seen. Idealization and devaluation, a dangerous cycle. Another common result of projection is the psychological defense mechanism called idealization and devaluation. When someone projects their unhealed anima or animus onto you, they may initially put you on a pedestal. You're perfect, magical, healing. They're a soulmate. But no human being can live up to a fantasy. Eventually, the cracks start to show. You say something they don't like. You set a boundary. You show that you're human. And that's when the idealization flips into devaluation. They suddenly withdraw. They lose interest. They go cold. Why? Because they weren't loving you. They were loving a projection of who they needed you to be. And when reality didn't match the projection, they couldn't handle the dissonance. Instead of adjusting the projection, they back away from the person. This is often deeply confusing for you. One moment, they're obsessed. The next, they're gone. But what you're witnessing is the collapse of a psychological defense, not a reflection of your value. Projection needs distance to survive. Here's the paradox of projection. It thrives in distance and dies in intimacy. As long as they don't contact you, they can continue the fantasy. They can tell themselves a story that you would reject them, or that you're not right for them, or that you don't really care. That story gives them comfort. But the moment they engage, actually talk to you, spend time with you, ask real questions, the projection begins to crack. They see your complexity, your flaws, your humanity, and that forces them to confront their own distortions. So silence becomes a protective measure, not from you, but from the truth. As long as they stay away, they can stay asleep in the dream. You trigger their transformation, but they're not ready. Jung taught that the people we project onto often become initiators of transformation. You might not even realize it, but your presence is shaking up this person's inner world. You're calling them toward growth, healing, and self-awareness. But growth is painful, and not everyone is ready to evolve. So instead of seeing you as an opportunity to heal, they experience you as a threat to their current identity. It's not about whether they want you. It's about whether they're ready to become the version of themselves that could meet you fully. They want you, but only from a place that feels safe, which often means from a distance. They may not understand this dynamic consciously. Most people don't, but the emotions are real. The confusion is real, and their silence is real, not because they don't care, but because they care too much to risk waking up to everything they've been suppressing. Part 6, individuation. They're not whole enough to come forward. At the heart of Carl Jung's philosophy lies the concept of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. It's not just about self-improvement or self-awareness. It's about bringing together the conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the anima or animus, and the deeper self. Individuation is a spiritual and psychological maturation, and it's one of the main reasons why someone might want you, but still never contact you. They feel the pull. They know there's something profound between you, but they're not yet whole enough to handle it. The psychological split. When someone hasn't gone through individuation or is only partway through it, their psyche is fragmented. They live in contradiction. Their ego says, I don't care, while their soul says, I need them. Their mind says, stay safe, while their body says, move closer. Their heart says, this is real, while their trauma says, this is dangerous. In this fractured state, they lack the inner integration to handle deep, transformative relationships. They want connection, but they haven't yet connected with themselves. And until that happens, they will always run from what could save them. It's not about you being wrong. It's about them not being ready. Relationships as mirrors for individuation. Jung believed that the people we are drawn to in powerful ways often serve as mirrors for our own psychological growth. You don't just make this person feel good, you make them confront everything they've avoided. Their repressed fears, their forgotten wounds, their unmet needs, their unclaimed power. You don't just represent love, you represent transformation. And transformation is messy. Most people think they want a soul connection until they realize that it requires becoming someone new. It requires burning old patterns, shedding defense mechanisms, confronting the shadow, grieving the past, and integrating parts of themselves they've kept in the dark. If they haven't done this work, then loving you feels like psychological death. Because in order to rise to your level of authenticity, they'd have to let go of the old self, the fragmented, defended, fearful self. That's a lot to ask of someone who's just beginning to ask, Who am I really? Fear of losing the old identity. Every step toward individuation threatens the old self. If someone has built their identity around being independent, unbothered, avoidant, stoic, or self-reliant, then desire for you is threatening. Not because you're harmful, but because you challenge their narrative. If they contact you, they risk feeling vulnerable, needing someone, admitting they're still healing, letting go of the image they've shown the world, and that terrifies them. They think, if I admit I want this, what does that say about me? They fear that opening the door to you will flood in a tidal wave of change they're not prepared to handle. So they stay behind that door even if they press their ear to it every night. Individuation requires solitude. One of the paradoxes in Jung's work is that relationships can catalyze individuation, but individuation often requires solitude. That person may instinctively know, whether consciously or not, that coming toward you would distract them from the work they need to do alone. You're magnetic, powerful, deep, and the connection they feel with you is overwhelming. But if they enter into it before they've laid the foundation of their true self, they'll either lose themselves in the relationship, sabotage it to protect their fragile ego, project their shadow onto you, and ruin what could have healed them. So they withdraw, not because they want to forget you, but because they're trying in their own unconscious way to find themselves before they reach for you. The internal crisis of the pre-individuated psyche. A person who hasn't undergone individuation lives with constant inner contradiction. They swing between extremes, longing and detachment, fantasy and denial, obsession and avoidance. This can make them unreliable, unpredictable, and confusing to be around. And the deeper the connection they feel with you, the more unstable they become internally. You awaken their desire for more, for wholeness, for love, for meaning. But if they don't know how to hold that desire, they collapse into fear. Jung would say they are not yet capable of holding the tension of opposites. They cannot reconcile the battle between I want them and I'm terrified of them. So instead of integrating that tension, which takes maturity, they resolve it through escape. That's why they vanish. That's why they freeze. That's why they go silent. Avoidance is a symptom of soul work left undone. Avoiding you isn't cowardice. It's a symptom of unfinished soul work. If someone hasn't faced their shadow, integrated their inner feminine or masculine, healed their complexes, or dissolved the false persona, they are not equipped to meet you in the way you deserve. They might love your soul, but hate what it demands of theirs. They might recognize your depth, but resent what it exposes in them. So instead of embracing the connection, they numb it. They tell themselves, I'm just not ready. They'll be better off without me. Maybe later, when I'm more healed. These are not always excuses sometimes. They're accurate reflections of a psyche that isn't yet whole enough to engage. You're already in the process they're avoiding. Here's what makes it even more painful often. You have already begun the individuation journey. You've faced your shadow. You've broken toxic cycles. You've peeled away masks. You've done the work of becoming who you are. And when someone who hasn't done that work meets you, it's like standing next to a mirror they can't bear to look into. You're a glimpse into their potential and a reminder of how far they still have to go. That's why they ghost, run, or play small. Not because they don't see your value, but because your wholeness highlights their fragmentation. It's not your fault. In fact, Jung would say, you're a gift, but one they don't know how to unwrap yet. Part 7, Synchronicity. The timing is not yours to control. Carl Jung introduced a concept that continues to mystify both psychologists and spiritual seekers alike: synchronicity. The idea that meaningful coincidences are not random, but rather a sign that unseen forces are at play. Synchronicity bridges the gap between the inner world and the outer experience. It's the moment when fate and free will seem to overlap. When you meet someone at the perfect or painfully imperfect moment, and when something that shouldn't happen still feels like destiny. So when someone wants you deeply but doesn't reach out, part of what's happening might be not psychological resistance, but divine timing. Jung would say the soul moves on its own timeline. And no matter how much we try to force a connection, if the synchronistic door hasn't opened, it simply won't. The illusion of control. In modern life, we're conditioned to believe we can control our relationships, text them, call them, chase them, fix it. But in the realm of depth psychology and synchronicity, control is often an illusion. Jung believed that every meaningful relationship carries with it a mystical component, a sense of meant to be, but not necessarily meant to be now. So that person may be deeply connected to you, but their psyche knows they are not aligned yet. They haven't reached the psychological or spiritual moment where the connection could unfold without destruction. To contact you now before their transformation might be to corrupt the very potential that draws them toward you. They don't contact you because their soul knows something their ego doesn't. Synchronicity versus attachment. There's a difference between a synchronistic connection and a codependent one. A codependent bond is fueled by fear, lack, and desperation. A synchronistic one is fueled by meaning, growth, and the alignment of inner and outer worlds. You may feel like everything inside you is screaming to reach out, to repair, to reconnect. But if they're silent and you've done your part, then the silence itself might be synchronistic. Maybe life is saying, not yet. Let them go so they can grow. You're meant to cross again, but not as you are now. Jung taught that when you try to force the unconscious to move faster than it's ready, you create imbalance. The psyche unfolds in layers. And if your connection is real, you can't ruin it by waiting. You can only ruin it by trying to control what isn't yours to control. The archetype of the right person. Wrong time. This person may be what Jung would call an archetypal encounter, someone who carries the energy of a transformation. They show up to initiate your evolution. You feel something ancient in them. Timeless. It's not casual, it's cosmic. But archetypal energy doesn't conform to human timelines. They might be the right person, but your meeting was not about romance. It was about awakening. Maybe their silence is part of that lesson. Maybe the point isn't to get them back, but to become who you're meant to be because they entered your life at all. That doesn't make the pain any easier, but it makes the pain meaningful. Jung would say, there's a pattern beneath the chaos. That person didn't show up for nothing, but they also didn't stay because they weren't meant to. The pause before the return. In many stories of individuation, there is a pause, a space between awareness and action. A space where the soul needs to integrate what it has just experienced. You may feel this person has vanished, but their unconscious may still be digesting the emotional and psychological impact of your presence. Silence. In this framework is not rejection, it's processing. They're asking themselves questions they never asked before. Why do I feel this way? What does this connection mean? What part of me have I forgotten? And those questions take time. Time you can't rush. Time they can't shorten. Synchronicity doesn't operate on your schedule. It's not about weeks or months. It's about soul readiness. And if they're not contacting you, it might be because the click hasn't happened inside them yet. But when it does, if it does, you won't have to chase it. Signs the universe might still be aligning you. If this is a synchronistic connection and not just an emotional projection, you'll likely experience signs that feel hard to ignore. You dream of them vividly. You run into people who remind you of them. You hear their name in strange places. They cross your mind at intense, seemingly random moments. You feel inner shifts happening as a result of knowing them. Jung would not say these signs guarantee a reunion, but he would say they indicate the connection is active on the level of the unconscious, even if the conscious contact has paused. The psyche, especially in archetypal relationships, often takes time to make the unconscious conscious. And while it's doing that, outer contact often goes quiet. It doesn't mean the story is over. It means the story has gone inward. Sometimes the timing is for you. There's a painful truth hidden in Jungian synchronicity. Sometimes the delay isn't for them. It's for you. You might think you are ready for this person, but the version of you they would meet right now is not the version who can hold this connection. Maybe you still have patterns to break, wounds to grieve, power to reclaim, boundaries to strengthen. The universe might be protecting the connection by keeping you apart. This isn't punishment. It's preparation. You think the relationship isn't working because they're absent, but in reality, you're being prepared for a reunion that only your future self can sustain. So instead of chasing them, you're invited to chase your wholeness. Instead of waiting for their message, wait for your evolution. That's where the real work is. Detachment as spiritual maturity. Jung emphasized the necessity of detaching from outcomes. When you truly believe a connection is synchronistic, you also must believe that you don't have to control it. If it's meant to happen, it will, and if it doesn't, it wasn't wasted. Because synchronicity isn't about guarantees. It's about messages from the unconscious. It's about guidance. It's about soul alignment. And in that context, their silence might be a message in itself, a sign that they're still becoming, a reminder that you still have more to do alone, a test of whether your desire is rooted in ego or in truth. Not everything unspoken is unfinished. And not everything unfinished is meant to be completed now. Part 8, what you should do. Healing without closure. Loving without contact. At this point, you might be asking, okay, I understand the psychological reasons, the fear, the shadow, the projection, the timing, but what do I do with all this understanding? What do I do with the fact that they still haven't contacted me? Carl Jung's work wasn't just about understanding others, it was about understanding yourself through your relationships with others. So the better question becomes, what am I supposed to learn about myself from this connection that never fully came to be? The answer might surprise you. You're meant to become whole whether they contact you or not. Let the absence teach you. There is no greater teacher than unfulfilled desire. Wanting someone who stays silent is a brutal form of psychological tension. It keeps your nervous system on edge, your heart wide open, and your soul searching for meaning. And Jung would say that's not a mistake. That longing has meaning. It is a bridge to your unconscious. The emotions you feel are not just about them. They are about the parts of you that feel invisible, the parts of you that feel rejected, the parts of you that are waiting to be chosen by you. Their silence reflects the parts of yourself you have not yet healed. Their distance mirrors the ways you abandon your own inner world. The ache isn't a punishment. It's a portal. Don't waste it. Love without possession. Jung believed that true love is never about owning or possessing. It is about seeing and allowing. And when someone awakens something sacred in you, even if they disappear, your love for them can still be real and pure and beautiful. You can love someone fully, even if they never speak to you again. You can hold their image in your heart with tenderness without needing them to fill the role you imagine. You can let the connection transform you, even if it never transforms into a relationship. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it sacred. It doesn't need a reply to be meaningful. Closure is an internal process. Most people crave contact because they want closure. They want a conversation, an apology, a goodbye, something that will make the confusion stop. But Jung's work reminds us that the psyche does not need outer closure to heal. What it needs is meaning. Once you understand why the experience came into your life, what it stirred, what it exposed, what it invited you to see, you can close the loop yourself. Ask yourself, what did this person reflect back to me? What part of me did they activate? Where am I still seeking approval or validation externally? What wound was reopened by their silence? Then feel it all. Let the grief wash through. Let the anger burn off. Let the sadness be sacred. Because when you feel through it, not run from it, you liberate yourself from the cycle. And in that liberation, you return to yourself. Choose your wholeness over their absence. Jung believed the greatest tragedy of life wasn't unrequited love. It was a fragmented psyche. And every relationship, especially the painful ones, is an opportunity to reintegrate. This person may have triggered your deepest need to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved, but they are not the source of that wholeness. You are. So you must choose. Do you keep waiting, hoping, replaying, or do you honor what was awakened in you and use it to go deeper into your own becoming? Their silence does not diminish your worth. Their absence does not define your story. You are not here to be chosen by someone else. You are here to choose yourself so completely that anyone who cannot meet you in your truth simply fades away. And if they are meant to return, they will not be returning to the version of you who once waited. They will return to someone who has become whole on their own. Let them go not because you don't care, but because you do. Letting go isn't about shutting off your feelings. It's about respecting the mystery. It's about understanding that love is not a demand, it's a gift. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is to hold space in your heart, but not your life. You can still bless their journey, send them peace, hope they find the healing they need, but do not shrink yourself waiting for their return. Let go with grace, not because you gave up, but because you rose up. If they do return, Jung taught that when the unconscious becomes conscious, life changes. If this person ever does reach out, it will be because something inside them shifted. And if that day comes, you'll know whether the contact is coming from ego or from soul. But you will not be the same. You will not need them to complete you. You will not beg for answers. You will not chase. You will listen and choose from your center. Because you did the work they were too afraid to begin. And whether they return or not, you will know something most people never realize. Their silence gave you yourself. And that was the real point all along. If this message spoke to your soul, it's because you're ready to stop waiting and start awakening. Remember, their silence is not your rejection, it's their reflection. And the most powerful thing you can do is to keep choosing yourself, even when others can't. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. We'll be back soon with more insights from Carl Jung and the power of depth psychology.